Hello and welcome to the session on assessing Dabrowski's levels of development. It's my pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to talk with all of you. Excuse me. Just a bit hoarse. I'm Nancy Miller, for those of you I have not met. I'm a social psychologist. I'm currently working at the Gifted Development Center in Denver, Colorado, USA. I work there with Linda Silverman and Bobby Gilman and others. I'm also currently editor of Advanced Development, a journal published by the Institute of Study for Advanced Development. And I have called for manuscripts available. They're yellow sheet out in the front, and hope all of you will take advantage of that. The journal just briefly focuses on issues of higher development, of undeveloped potential, and giftedness in adults. So welcome to all of you, and I hope to be through in time that we have an opportunity for questions as well. How many of you are familiar with Dabrowski's levels of development? Most all of you, that's wonderful. Have you ever wondered what level an individual might be? Perhaps your own level of development? Have you ever thought about how to assign levels to individuals? That's something I've been thinking about for a very long time. Ever since I was a student at the University of Denver, many years ago, and Chris reminded me this morning that it was 30 years ago. And she said, I hope someone's looking at my dissertation 30 years from now. So it's been a 30-year journey for me. Dabrowski, let's make sure I go forward. Did I go forward?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a minute. Dabrowski labeled levels. Perhaps it's on the next one. Oh, there it is. It's on the bottom. Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration describes 5 levels of development, each organized differently. He labeled levels 3, 4, and 5 as higher or multilevel development and distinguished that from levels 1 and 2, which were unilevel development. There may be a dominant level. Dabrowski. You're familiar with how these different there may be a dominant level, or what's called a center of gravity, at which an individual is operating. And it's that dominant level that we're attempting to assess when we assign a level to an individual. But the levels are very complex, and because of that complexity, a person doesn't always function at one level. In fact, they may sway and engage in behavior that's lower or higher at any point. But in assessing levels, it's that dominant level or center of gravity that we're attempting to determine. I don't want to show that one just yet. I just want to ask if you can think of reasons why we might want to assess an individual's level of development. Is there any good reason for doing that? Can you think of a reason? Are there any that come to mind? You said you were interested in, well, why might you want to do that? Is it just for our own knowledge? Here are some ideas that I had. And the first one that comes to my mind is for research purposes, because I'm also a researcher. And in order to be able to look at factors or variables that promote development, we need to be able to assess development and to have individuals at different levels of development. And it's at that point then that we might look at what it is and how we might promote development in individuals. Second, and this is what was talked about in the last session, this is what Sal talked about in terms of counseling. In order to understand the issues that are facing an individual, that is to understand that source of the conflict that he was talking about, we need to be able to know, where is an individual coming from? Are these issues those associated with level 3, inner conflict, pain, guilt, or are they perhaps at level 2? So understanding an individual's level is very helpful in terms of the counselor in addressing the issues being brought. And the third one is particularly relevant to me, and that is to identify individuals who represent moral exemplars. That is, those individuals whose life and work inspires us and shows us the level at which an individual might rise, and what I call the possible human. How high might someone go, and what would that look like in terms of their behavior, their interaction with others? Can you think of any other? Are there any others that come to your mind? Those are the three most relevant for me. Okay, hold on just 1 minute. Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration, as I said, defines 5 levels of development that are organized differently at each level. But through development, the personality is reformed along a number of dimensions, requiring cognitive complexity and emotional responsiveness. And the personality, through development, moves from external control to internal control, from impulse to reflection, from sociability to empathy, from the social norm to the norm of the ideal, from relative values to universal values, from competition to service to others, from individual love to an all-embracing love. And this was adapted from Dabrowski, Kovchuk, and Piowski, 1970, The Mental Growth. Early discrimination of the levels began with neurological exams and observations, because Dabrowski was a psychiatrist as well as a theorist. But he was also a researcher. And we don't often think about that. But Bill is going to talk about some of the tests and questionnaires that were developed, some of his research efforts. But in 1969, when Dabrowski was then in Canada, he received a large Canada Council grant, the purpose of which was to identify individuals at various levels of development. Questionnaires, so in order to do this, questionnaires were developed. Also, verbal stimuli, which are emotion-laden words, picture tests, and these were administered to hundreds of subjects. And many subjects, or some subjects, also wrote their autobiography. And their autobiography became, okay, I could have put that up. Nice. That's what I just talked about. The results of primarily the autobiographies resulted in these 2 books, The Theory of Levels of Emotional Development and Multilevel List of Emotion and Instinctive Functions. So if you're looking for results of that large study, it was a content analysis primarily of the autobiographies, and those appear in these 2 books. But the content analysis of autobiographical material was described as painstaking, very difficult, Sal has attempted to define and talk about some of the dynamisms for us, but using the dynamisms to assign levels has been a difficult process for those of us who've attempted it. Most of the individuals in this study, in this large-scale study, ranged from level 1 to 2. The participants in this study were hundreds. That gives you an idea of the difficulty in finding individuals at all levels, and particularly those individuals at higher levels. That's not an easy task. Excuse me. In 1981, excuse me, also hoarseness has set in. In 1981, students Gage, Morse, and Dr. Dabrowski developed an instrument for identifying the levels. It was a short 6-item questionnaire, open-ended. In order to administer it, one question is placed on each page, and individuals are asked to write as much as possible, even using the back of the paper. The questions were each designed to focus subjects' attention on one of the dynamisms. The first question was, think of times when you've been strongly affected about what others think of you, or when you've compared yourself to others in some way. What dynamism is that? Anybody know? It's the dynamism called second factor. And I think if you look at your packet, I've provided you a copy of the DRI, as it's called, the definition response instrument. And I think on that sheet, I indicated the dynamism that each question is designed to address. And this first one is the second factor, social acceptability, susceptibility to the influence of others, being strongly influenced by the perception of others. The second question, think of those questions which cause strong doubts within you, that frustrate you, perhaps result in anxiety and depression. The dynamism there is disquietude with oneself. That is agitation or anxiety that results from what's within you. So it's asking individuals to reflect on these particular issues. Recall times when you felt inadequate, unworthy, not good enough. Possibly you felt frustrated by what may have been lacking in yourself. This is the dynamism, inferiority toward oneself. Number 4, consider those situations which have caused you to feel frustration or anger toward yourself. That's dissatisfaction with oneself. Question 5, think if there have been any times when you've tried to stand back and look at yourself objectively. Upon what things did you reflect? And that's the subject-object within oneself. Asking a person to reflect on what's within. Number 6 is think of your ideal self and those qualities which you think are best for an ideal life. What attributes have you most dreamed of having? This is the personality ideal. The highest and guiding principle, according to Dabrowski. So this is a DRI, and unfortunately, it still required a very thorough knowledge of the theory in order to code responses to the DRI. And reliability was not very high. Though we still use this instrument to collect data, as a graduate student at the University of Denver and as a member of the Dabrowski study group many years ago. Linda Silverman was a member of that group, Frank Falk was a member of that group, graduate students in psychology and sociology and education all came together to study Dabrowski's theory, and one of the tasks that we took on was coding responses to the DRI. And because of the difficulty we had in understanding the dynamisms and using the dynamisms as a way of coding, I took on the task of developing a new and different way of coding levels, which I think is more objective and more systematic, and I believe is still theoretically relevant, still remaining true to the theory of Dabrowski's levels. The first task was to identify the criteria which underlay Dabrowski's concept of advanced development, to determine what makes each level distinct from the others. So that is to discover the dimensions, what some people in writing about it have called the deep structure of the theory. I came up with 3 dimensions, 3 categories: a person's values, their feelings towards themselves, and their feelings towards others. In describing those categories, I relied on the dynamisms. I also used the study of values by Alport, Vernon and Lindsay's book in 1960. So what I'm going to show you now is the coding system. Categories are values, self, and others. It's called the Miller Assessment Coding System, or the MACS for short. There are 3 categories. There are 15 subcategories under each category, representing the 5 levels of development. You have a copy of all of this in your handout. If you got one in the handouts, if you didn't, if you email me, I'll send you one. I call the values at level 1 self-serving, those at level 2 stereotypical, at level 3 individual. That's when the individual has created this hierarchy of values and are attempting to live their life according to them, but with some inconsistency. Level 4, universal values, and level 5, transcendent values. I've provided in your packet also a very brief definition of each of the categories as well as the subcategories, and given you a very short example. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a few of the descriptions. I'm going to give you ones that relate to levels 3, 4, and 5, because I think those are the most interesting. They're the ones that are also the most difficult to find in individuals when you distribute the DRI to a group of students, even graduate students, even bright students. They've been given to Mensa members. Data's been collected on various populations. And still, the number of individuals at higher levels is very small. Let's take a look at individual values at level 3. The values are based on a self-evaluated standards that begin to form a hierarchy. People are independent thinkers at this level. They're involved in the issues and the interpretation of life. They're concerned with issues such as morality, right versus wrong conduct, justice, integrity, based on internal criteria. And while these are their values, they're not carried out consistently. And here's an example of what one subject wrote. I find myself willing and able to stand up for what I believe is right and just, but I'm tempted to back down from my position if others oppose my viewpoint. It's a struggle to continue to act on principle and not join the crowd. I apparently still have a need not to be different. Now let's compare that to universal values at level 4. Universal values are universally agreed upon values such as honesty, equality, freedom, justice. One's values at this level are based on independent convictions and autonomously evaluated hierarchy of values is organized and well-developed. High ethical and moral standards become the guiding principle of one's life at level 4. And this is what one subject said. All of my conscious life I have sought out wisdom. Ever since I was a very young child, I wanted to be wise more than anything. I've sought out sound judgment and actively attempted to learn fair, honest, and wise dealing within myself and in the outer world. Can you see the difference? At level 5, universal values surpass the material realm and involve the spiritual life. There's a concern with the unity of the cosmos as a whole and the individual's relationship to it. The goal is to achieve perfection in moral judgment and practice. And this is the personality ideal. Let's see if we have an example of this. The ideal self, to have wisdom and understanding, not merely knowledge. To be wise enough to know what can be accomplished and how and when. To have the eternal rather than the temporal perspective. Would you agree that's level 5 response? It's as close as you can get to it from subjects that have responded to the DRI. All the examples that I have come from responses to the DRI in various studies in the past. So that's where they come from. Some of them, I might argue, are perhaps level 4, maybe 4.5. But we're trying to provide examples from real individuals. Not case studies exactly, but how a person at level 5 might answer a question on the DRI. I have a few more examples. I don't think I have them. No, I don't have them for you. I don't have any more of them, I don't think. But I just want to give you a couple, since those 3 have all been with regard to values. I want to give you 1 or 2 in the other categories. So I've chosen the one inner conflict, which is feelings toward oneself at level 3. This inner conflict results from self-evaluation based on these emerging personal standards. And here's an example that one guy wrote. And he said, "Shit, I feel that way a lot lately." Yes.
You're on.
Oh, I don't have, I'm sorry, I don't have one. The next one goes beyond that. Oh, sorry, it goes beyond the, and I don't have it on, I don't have this, don't have it. Okay, so the question was, think about things that you reflect upon. He said, "I feel that way a lot lately. Inadequate, unworthy, not good enough. What seems lacking, though, aren't so much specific skills, talents, as much as the inability to function as I think I should. If I can be responsive to others, if I can't be responsive to others, can't be caring, able to do, when I become so focused in on me and my frustrations, I feel worthless. I can't believe people will want to be around me. I feel disgusted with myself and expect others to also. I experience myself from this state as harmful to others and in my lack of response, and feel that they should get away from me and me from them so as not to hurt. I think this reflects the feeling and the pain and the suffering of an individual at level 3. And I'm just going to pick one more and give you an example of feelings towards others. And I'm going to choose a level 5 response. Feelings towards others at level 5, I've called communion. The relationships are intimate, they may be spiritual, universal love is attained, and one has empathy for all living things. Responsibility for others is accepted, and there's a willingness to serve and sacrifice for the sake of others. This is what one respondent said. To have love, not merely a feeling, but the love that is a deep, healing compassion that reaches people and touches them and draws them into the bond of the eternal family and opens in them the way to wholeness. Okay, next slide. Now I'm going to talk just briefly about moral exemplars because I think it's so important for us to identify those individuals who inspire us. Case studies, some believe, and I'm one of those, are absolutely essential to understanding Dabrowski's concept of developmental levels. In advanced development, we've had several case studies and moral exemplars written in the past few years. Most of them seem to be in the early volumes. Michael Kowski wrote 3 of them. He wrote one in volume 2, volume 4 and 5. He wrote a moral exemplar. Maybe I have another slide about it. There we go. He described the lives of Eleanor Roosevelt, Eddie Hillison, and Lita Hollingworth. They're described as women of extraordinary strength, purpose, and moral conviction. In volume 3, Kathleen Spaltro also wrote about Eddie Hillison. I don't know whether you're familiar with her or know who she was. She was a young Jewish woman who freely chose to work in the hospital of the transit camp Westerbork, the last stop on the way to Auschwitz. Spaltro documents Edie's remarkable spiritual progression during her very short life. It's a very inspiring piece. There also, Lori Nixon wrote about the inner struggle of mystics and creative persons such as Charles Darwin, and demonstrated how their struggle corresponds to Dabrowski's account of higher level personality disintegration. Finally, in volume 7, Anne-Marie Morrison illustrates higher level development through the lives of an Aboriginal medicine man and an Andalusian mystic. And in volume 7, Barry Grant also provides a case study of a woman who exhibits both moral relativism and moral commitment in her life. More case studies are needed. So one of the purposes in my presentation is to encourage more case studies to be written and, of course, submitted to Advanced Development Journal. In 2006 and 2007, I did a presentation, published a paper on Nobel Peace Laureates, and particularly those who attended a Peace Jam conference, which was held in 2006 in Denver. And I used quotes from Desmond Tutu and from the Dalai Lama to illustrate higher level development in the paper. Here's one quote I used from Nobel Peace Laureate Desmond Tutu. He said to the participants, these young students, activists, you come here and you say, I'll make a difference. I care about poverty. I care about war. All of you are peacemakers. We're all opposed to war. We stand for peace. And from the Dalai Lama, there are no national boundaries. The whole globe is becoming one body. In these circumstances, I think war is outdated. Destruction of your neighbor is actually destruction of yourself. I see both of those statements, and particularly the last one, as an example of higher level development. Did anybody care to say where you place this? At level 5, perhaps? Perhaps some of you'd like to, perhaps Michelle Kane would like to write a case study, a moral exemplar. That's something that's been suggested in the past, and so not something new. But I think the Dalai Lama would be an excellent example of a moral exemplar. Dabrowski himself mentioned Abraham Lincoln, Socrates, Gandhi, and Mother Teresa as individuals who exemplify empathy and self-reflection. Who are others that you consider moral exemplars? Who would you nominate?
Well, Lady Peace Prize winners.
Okay?
Some of them.
Some of them. Okay. Anybody else?
My mom.
Your mom? Terrific. Terrific. Are there some you'd like to write about? Please see the call for manuscripts. Advanced Development Journal is seeking articles for volume 16. And I think moral exemplars would be a great addition. So this is a plea for all of you who are interested in higher level development. Think about those individuals that you would nominate. Perhaps they're examples of level 3, struggling for the consistency in behavior that matches that developing hierarchy of values. Perhaps they're at level 4, in which they are much more driven and able to operate and function at that higher level. Or perhaps they're level 5. Those individuals who've reached their personality ideal. Okay, I'm opening it up for questions. Yes?
Would you recommend your system as a way to quantify these moral exemplars or level examples?
Well, of course. One thing that I didn't mention is that the coding manual, of which you have just an excerpt in your handout, is available upon request. If you email me, I'll be glad to send you a copy. In that coding manual are the coding procedures, as well as many examples. There's also a coding form that shows you how to quantify an individual based on those categories and the levels. I have looked at reliability, yes. And in the study that I did, the reliability was quite high. It was 0.8 something. I think it ranged between 0.69 and 0.90. Yes.
So what was it that you did in your reliability study that came up with a better result than Michael and others did years ago? Because I know he wasn't very happy with it. I used the DRI and a group of yoga meditators. I was quite happy with the result. Intuitively, I thought it worked well. But what is there about what did you do for reliability? Split half or 2 different occasions, or what type of reliability was it?
Well, the reliability was based on 2 different coders.
Okay.
Having 2 individuals, 2 raters or 2 coders to code the responses. And then look at the reliability between the 2 coders.
So do you think it's your system of subcategories that help make a higher degree of reliability?
I think so. I think that, yes, what I've argued is that I'm looking at it in terms of values and self-feeling and feelings towards others, provides a more consistent way of analyzing, content analyzing textual material. That said, I think the reason is that, as Sal talked about, the difficulty in understanding perhaps the dynamisms. And that's what I hope I've provided, is a way of understanding the dynamisms, because I use the dynamisms to create those categories. And to me, that's how I saw the dynamisms being enacted in terms of an individual, how an individual expresses their values, those desired qualities and characteristics, and then how they feel about themselves, and then what their interactions with others are like. Are their interactions competitive, or are their interactions more towards being of service? Are they assuming responsibility for others? Are they acting on the basis of what they can do and contribute to others? Thank you. Yes?
I thought that it was really helpful in your coding manual, the way that you had the questions. You know, I was talking about my husband with it, because he was describing, being like pushed against the wall, because I was pushing him to the wall to make a decision. But when I thought about your questions, they were really helpful, because I could look at the questions, for the dynamisms, and then I could look again at the definitions, because sometimes they are hard to, it's hard to know. Something might look like it's one place, but really it's not if you go more into context. But you had that in there too, if you have more information available, it makes it easier.
Yes, absolutely.
But those questions, I think, they helped me really see, finally, I think, in some of them, okay, so this, or how you can put them together, how you have, third factor maybe with something else. And I'm like, I forget that.
Put those together.
Put things
right.
together.
So she's saying that under one category, and particularly those that have to do with inner conflict, as Sal was talking about, some of those are quite similar and can be grouped together and can be under inner conflict with regard to feelings towards oneself.
I'd like to ask a question. I've always seen a big disconnect here, and I'd like you to just reflect on it for a second. In 1977, when the Volume 2 came out, there was the case studies presented in Volume 2, and they were reproduced again in 1996. And Dabrowski and I talked about them. The case study number 3, which was the exemplar of level 3, was Marlene Reinhold. Now, level 4 was Semi-Super. And Dabrowski said they used semi-exuberant because they had a lot of good material,
Yeah.
and there was sufficient material there that they thought they could use that. Although there were some problems with exuberant as an exemplar, notably his open marriage. So there were some questions there. But there was no level 5 in that book. And I asked Dabrowski about that, and he said, well, he says, in my lifetime I've never met a level 5. And I've always been kind of disconnected with that because it seemed like level 5s were being identified in the United States. For example, you just talked about a level 5 exemplar here on your slides. And it's troubling to me that Dabrowski himself could not identify level 5 in his life, although he had broad experience both in Europe and in North America. He looked through these people, he looked very hard through these people, and couldn't find them. I just don't, why would that be?
How could that be?
How can that be?
Would you want to comment on that, and I
do
give
want
an
to do
answer?
that, yeah. Is it not necessarily the case that the example you gave as a level 5 response, that individual may not have consistently
Absolutely.
done this, so they're not a level 5 person, but they had one
But they
level 5 response.
Yes, and we definitely found more higher level responses to the last item. What is your ideal, what is the third? Let me look back and see. It's question 6 that says, think of your ideal self. So this doesn't mean the level that they're actually operating at necessarily, but it's asking them, what can you imagine? And what are those qualities that you think are best for an ideal life? What attributes have you most dreamed of having? That question produced the highest level responses because there are some individuals, and I would also say that some of the responses I have at level 5, perhaps they're level 4.5. They seem to me higher than some of those that I had categorized as level 4. But if they're 4.5, then I'm pleased. And in most cases, they were those qualities and characteristics that individuals dreamed of having. Maybe not the ones that they could actually operationalize.
But that introduces a confabulation that makes it very confusing. Is your instrument rating responses or rating individuals?
Well,
You're inferring the rating of the individual, the level of the individual, from the responses.
that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the things that Chris said is the more information, and that you made that point also, Bill, is having a great deal of information with regard to a respondent. Perhaps having an autobiography provides more information, certainly, than having an answer to 6 open-ended questions.
But it's very tricky to say that's a level 5 response, but it may not come from a level 5 person who's fully actualized as
Yes.
fully realized as a level 5 person.
And the instances in which we have people writing more, providing more information, sometimes filling 2 full pages. And some people do it on the computer where you really do get, instead of handwriting, you really do get a lot of information. But that's still not like having an autobiography to judge. You have the material that you have, and we're looking for responses that indicate, that provide examples of what a level 3 or 4 or response is like. Would look like, yes. And we do find that in an individual's response to the DRI. They're not all at level 4 or level 3. When the ones that Dabrowski found were between level 1 and 2, I'm sure that's true of the data that we're collecting also. In fact, some studies that I have coded information for people who are collecting data. It's very hard to find those higher level responses.
It's funny, we looked at the verbal stimuli and some of the actual examples from people that were collected by Dabrowski. For example, in response to the item death, one guy wrote the end, and another woman responded with 10 pages.
Yes.
So I mean, that's a factor that you have to really weigh out.
It is, certainly. When responses are brief and terse and not much information is provided, you don't feel that you are able to make as clear a judgment. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, Nancy, you referred to a handout in the package. There isn't one, and I don't know if that's my fault when you sent the email and so on, but if not, then if you contact me, we'll either post it on our website or we'll distribute it to those people who are delegates at the conference.
I distributed it here.
Well, you did.
There are only 15 copies.
But I
didn't get it.
Oh, you didn't get one, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
But I think I only made 15 copies, so there are people that did not get one. Yes?
Hi, I'm John McPhail. I'm presenting today, and I'm talking about the role spirituality plays in advanced development. And one of the things is I've gone through this theory and experienced it in my personal life is I see a lack of emphasis on the spiritual. If you look at what level 5 is, it is transcendental, it's spiritual, it's universal, it's eternal.
I agree.
And I think one of the unintended consequences of approaching this from an academic level is we might tend to intellectualize something that's very sacred and something that's very, well, when you're looking at universal morals, divine laws, I'm becoming convinced that the reason we don't see more of the level 5 is because there's not enough emphasis within, I don't want to say Western culture, but just the world on giving proper credit to the role spirituality plays in the self-domain, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that's a very good point. I also want to say that my one attempt to use this coding system with material other than the DRI was the paper and the presentation from the Nobel Peace Laureates and the Peace Jam participants. And there I used material, quotes of participants and the presenters at that conference. And so I feel pretty confident in being able to use the coding system to code other material. However, the more information you have to code, the more information you have on an individual, such as Desmond Tutu or the Dalai Lama, the more you have additional material to use, the more confidence you have in assigning a level.
Did you say what the Peace Jam was?
Did I say what it was? Are people familiar with Peace Jam? And no? I'm not sure whether it's every year, but Peace Jam is an ongoing attempt to simulate peace throughout the world. And these participants are invited, Nobel Peace Prize winners are invited to come. Some of them attend various meetings, but there's a network of young activists set up throughout the United States and I believe throughout the world. And the individual students develop their own projects to promote peace in their neighborhood or their community. And they come there to talk with the Peace Jam organizers and the Nobel Peace Laureates about their specific projects in order to get information, and then they present results of what they have done and talk about future steps. And so these are all individuals, students through Nobel Peace Laureates who are interested in promoting peace and actively engaged in promoting peace worldwide. Any other comments or questions? We have about 5 minutes left. Yes?
The manual is how many pages?
Maybe 15, 10 to 15, 12 to 15
I was
perhaps.
wondering if we would have a possibility to have a small number of copies made and made available, even if we pay for them or whatever. At this conference.
At this conference, I don't have a copy of it with me at this conference.
It's accessible digitally though.
I
Not
don't.
necessarily.
I don't think so. I don't have my computer with me either. You have it with you?
I have the 1985 one, in Dropbox, if anybody wants.
Is it the updated one? Is it the?
No, I mean, it's from your dissertation,
Uh-huh.
so it's not.
So I have updated it since then.
So we can just email you.
You can email me and if you're interested, and I'll be glad to send you a copy. And I'd be thrilled with your interest in using it and your reflections and your feedback with regard to it.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Miller.
Thank you for your participation.
Yes, it's a break for lunch in 5 minutes across the hall in Canadian rooms, and you have to be there to get your prize if you're making.